Not necessarily because it wasn't a good film, but Lady in the Water is the only cinema film I have ever walked out on. Not necessarily because it wasn't good, but I will explain this in a moment. But my memory is so shocking because I thought this was a very scary film. And it isn't. I also didn't like it, but that's largely down to personal preference. But I'll talk more about that in a moment. This was released in 2006. It's directed and written by M. Night Shyamalan, and we have a cast including Paul Giamatti, Bryce Dallas Howard, Bob Balaban, and various others. The performances are very good. Visually, it's quite an appealing film. I'm a big Shyamalan fan, but this is very much a fantasy thriller, and I don't really like fantasy. So I didn't care for the narrative. However, I was in my memory expecting it to be a lot scarier, and when I pulled up the IMDb page before watching it and I realised it's PG rated in the UK, I kind of thought, how did I walk out of a PG film? And there are two reasons for this. This was released in 2006, so I would have been 14 at the time, which is another thing I was confused about, because before I sat down to watch it, I was so certain it was a 15. And I was thinking, how did I watch it? I've never snuck into a film I wasn't old enough for. How could I have even been there? And then I realised it was a PG and I felt ridiculous. My friend and I went to see this, and we were both very much rom-com and comedy fans. This was probably the first thriller film I ever saw in the cinema, or tried to see. We left very quickly. And that was one of the main reasons, is that it was just a lot darker than perhaps either of us were prepared for at that age. But also, it was freezing cold. The cinema was really cold at that point, and it was just a horrible atmosphere. So we left, and I always meant to watch it again now that I'm a horror addict. In my memory, it was a really scary film. And it's not in the slightest. So I don't know what was wrong with me at that age. But it meant that I had a very different experience with this film. Having now watched it all of the way through, I can confirm that I guess it's okay, but I didn't really care for it. It is about this lady in the water, and she's actually from another world, and she appears in this apartment building swimming pool, and she's a character called Story, and Cleveland is there to help her get back to where she needs to be, and it involves this kind of storybook story, and it just, I didn't care for it. I didn't find it to be interesting. I don't like fantasy. So that's partly on me. But in general, I also found it to be very slow. I didn't think there were that many thrilling elements, considering it's supposed to be a fantasy thriller. I just found it to be very mundane. So that being said, if it's a PG, fair enough. I don't think PG and thriller really go well together. Because how thrilling can it actually be? For example, a PG horror isn't that scary. They're usually fun. They're usually comedy horrors at the very most. By which I mean they're kids on Halloween or something like that. But for a thriller to be PG, I don't think that works very well. And absolutely that's the case here. I don't think it's a thrilling experience. I think it's a very slow story. I don't think it's that great. If you like fantasy, you may enjoy the fantasy element. The world building is not too bad. That part of it works well, but by no means would I say it's a thrilling experience. So it's not at all what I was expecting. Mostly from my memory, but also it does seem like it's going to be a very dark, thrilling film, and it's very tame. It's very slow. I guess Story is a well enough written character. She's played by Bryce Dallas Howard. The performance there is quite good. I will say to begin with, and I was able to kind of pinpoint where I think I walked out, when I think I walked out in the cinema, and I think it was within the first 15 minutes. It was really early on in the film, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, maybe the mystery element of wondering who this is fascinating, but then once we find out what's going on and the fantasy element begins, I lost all interest. It's very, very tame, and I think either it should have been a lot more fun, it could have been a fun fantasy, or it could have been a much darker film that could have lent into the thriller aspect a lot more. So I just think it's murky. I think it's sitting in the middle. It's not a fun, fascinating fantasy. Yes, if you like fantasy films, you might enjoy bits of it, but I still don't think it's the most interesting. And it's certainly by no means a dark, thrilling film either. So I don't think it's a great experience. But by no means is it scary, so I really don't know. Honestly, absolutely ridiculous to say that I was scared and walked out on this. It says a lot about what my viewing experience was. As I've mentioned many times before, I watched The Little Vampire when I was about 8 and I was terrified and I didn't touch anything even remotely scary, probably until this film. And for me, at the time, it was a little bit dark. So yeah, if you're young and inexperienced with thrillers, you might find it scary. But if you're looking for a dark thriller because that's what you like, it's not going to deliver. So in general, if you're a big fantasy fan, you might enjoy bits of it. The performances are good, the camera works fine, but in general, it's not a great experience. At least I can say I've watched it now. At least I can finally say I made it to the end of Lady in the Water, and honestly, it wasn't a great experience. Do I recommend it? I don't really know. If you're curious, check it out. It's not terrible. I guess it's watchable, but it's not a thrilling film. It's a very slow film. The characters are well enough written, but the story is very flat. And in general, while I'm not saying I'm glad I walked down on it, I feel like I would have eventually, if I got over the fear, I would have become very bored. So don't love it. Maybe there's an audience for it. But despite the fact I generally love Shyamalan's genuinely scary films, I didn't think Lady in the Water worked very well at all.